real umbrella. Now, what else happened? The Philadelphia experiment, which had been scrapped and abandoned in 1943, the Navy revived it and went to John von Neumann in 1947. He was already working at the Institute on producing the first all-electronic digital computer, which he did complete in 1952.
Again, for the use on the
for use in many areas. But he knew that a computer would be necessary to solve the problems of the personnel and provide a zero-time reference for personnel as well as for the ship. The ship returned after the equipment was destroyed. All equipment was not destroyed, but let's say the banks of electron tubes that provided the power to the fields for the two huge generators provided the magnetic field. When they went, the magnetic fields went, and of course the regular fields slowly collapsed. But the point here is that all of this work was not abandoned. It was put in a file. And the very high-powered electromagnetic fields which were generated for the invisibility effects produced the very severe problems on the personnel. And this was the result of course, grossly excessive magnetic and electronic fields, which never had been used before, to my knowledge or anyone else's, in such close proximity to personnel, namely about 75 feet from the antenna, which was radiating something of the order of 20 megawatt pulses rotating in a circular field of RF, and all of the power that was going into the generators also pulsed to produce a rotating magnetic field on the deck. This is very, very high-powered stuff, and you don't subject the human mind or nervous system to this. They found out, of course, later that you don't, and many medical reports were written. In 1947, they asked von Neumann to resurrect the project, see if it could be salvaged, if there was anything they could learn from it.
It would be interesting to see in the medical literature whether these reports can be found. Our leading Russian dissident proved that there was a massive contamination and probably a nuclear explosion in an underground nuclear storage in Ural by discovering an explosion in the number of papers on the radioactive contamination of the environment in official papers in official journals. So if these papers could be traced in official journals, that would be a roundabout way to proving that something like that could have happened.
Well, I'm sure that those reports are still classified by the military, the Navy, but I do know one person who examined them and told me that he had examined them, found they were very interesting in terms of the results, and that was a Mr. George Hoover, now retired from the Navy, who was in charge of an investigative commission appointed in the Office of Naval Research in 1955. And I've talked with him personally, and he admitted to the Philadelphia experiment, he admitted to the 4 medical reports, and he said so far as he was concerned, the 4 medical reports were the most interesting part of it because it was prime research material to try and show what happened to these sailors, what was the cause of the problem. Well, they had to solve it, obviously, and they did. Von Neumann found the means with the computer to provide some type of zero-time lock reference to the personnel. How this was accomplished, I do not know, because when the equipment was smashed, the ship returned to its proper point in the harbor because not all equipment was smashed, and the zero-time reference generator they had, designed and built by Tesla, was still working.
And even here, a little introduction. I've noticed that several such smashings occurred in the Philadelphia and Montauk projects when there was a locking into some energies from higher space, so that basically the whole system became a free energy device that was siphoning energy off from the ether, from the higher dimensions, from the higher classes of energies in the universe. So even after cutting the cables from the local power supplier, the installation would not turn off. Cutting the cables inside it would not turn it all of it down. So finally they had to physically smash most of the modules in order for it to shut down, which is another indirect proof that free energy can be obtained out of thin air.
In a sense, that is quite true. There is no such thing as a free lunch. The energy comes from somewhere, but our modern physics has not recognized this until very recently, that this possibility may exist. Now, to get back to this thing, when they resurrected the project, von Neumann found the answer. He also had built and designed this computer. A new system was delivered to the Navy and tested in 1953, and it was fully successful, no personnel side effects, and therefore the Navy now changed the name again from its classification of 1940, which was the Project Rainbow. They changed it to the Phoenix Project. It's a continuation of the same project, but again under a new name. The Phoenix Project became an umbrella for many, many things. Now, of course...
Can you name a few that are just the
Oh, yeah.
most important ones?
I can. I want to show the time frame of what happened here to this. So they continued onward after 1953, and of course it went through many generations, and the equipment became small, almost portable, and still worked, and worked very well. And down to the point, down to the size of essentially of an attaché case in the latest systems. They do have the capability of making a Secret Service operator for the president or the government invisible, either with carry-on hardware on his belt or his back or a suitcase, or by treating him in a field which will render him physically invisible without carrying hardware for a period of about 72 hours. Now, this technique is good for that period of time, but when he comes out of it, he gets very sick and very nauseous for days. The use of the hardware apparently produces no nauseous side effects. In any case, this project continued on, and eventually, while it was initially at Brookhaven, it also was moved to Montauk. And that was what was called P2 or Phase 2, the Invisibility Project. Phase 1 was, of course, the mind control, which they developed some very successful techniques in the late 70s. The Philadelphia experiment hardware and process was continued, and they became very successful with that. It is now installed on all of the supercarriers, all of the fighter aircraft, both Army and Navy, Israeli fighter aircraft, and the B-1 bomber, the B-2, which of course is a stealth bomber, and it is very successful. They've made attempts, of course, with the B-2 to make it radar nearly invisible by means of a special absorptive coating. A coating is so damnably heavy that with the normal jet engines, and they have some big ones in it, that aircraft is subsonic. They cannot go supersonic. So they've since, according to rumor, in quotes, outfitted some other special drive engines, ET hardware, if you will, or our own government's developments in those directions, where it makes it a TOV, a transorbital vehicle, which doesn't go out into space. Now, according to the public record, only one B-2 has been built because of the unbelievable cost. The research on that thing cost billions upon billions of dollars. I understand $22 billion total. And they figure to replicate it today will cost about $1 billion per copy. And the government is tearing their hair out about it. They're thinking they're going to scrap the project. Well, of course, that's what they tell the public. Who knows what they will do. But that's only one of the side aspects. The real main factors of what went on at Montauk were Phase 3, which was, of course, the development to a much higher degree of time travel, which was discovered by the Germans in 1945. That process was removed after the war was over and went to Montauk. And even prior to that, Dr. John von Neumann had created a time machine. There was no problem in doing this because the technology for the Philadelphia experiment was so similar that it only be carried a little bit further with certain controls, and they had a time machine.
But there was a separate time machine installation that was not using the ship's coil.
It was totally separate. It was fairly small, and von Neumann did this on his own at the Institute, under the nose of the Navy, without letting the Navy knowing what he was doing. And, of course, he was not working for the Navy. He was working for the Institute.
His time machine hobby, his little hobby.
His little hobby. And he just said when it was ready, well...
Let's go.
Yeah, well, Edward, which was my name then, says, let's take a look at what's going on in the future. I want proof that you were back there and that you really talked to me 40 years later. So I made a couple of trips back and forth. I don't honestly recall how many. And eventually I came back with enough paperwork and proof that he was satisfied that, yes, there was a Phoenix Project. Yes, I had been there. Yes, that this thing did exist in the future, and he was part of it. Going to be, that is, from his viewpoint in 43, 44.
How big was this time machine? Do you remember the physical dimensions?
Physical dimensions were fairly small. The radiating control element was perhaps 6 feet high and perhaps 2 feet, 2.5 feet in diameter.
Would you go inside it? Or
no, actually it created a field which you just stood within the field. You didn't have to get in the machine. There was a lot of other peripheral hardware driving it. A lot of tube circuits and a lot of other stuff, because in those days everything was electron tubes.